I'll go to my system message. And then finally, you do need a key. So going to the previous question about the API key, yes, right now, DeepSeek, unfortunately, they seem to have locked down their API. I think Misbah's got it right. They probably got a huge deluge of activity, maybe a little much. So right now, you seem to be mostly limited to go to like DeepSeek.com and go to their chat interface, unless you already had credits. If you already had credits, they'll let you burn down those credits, right? And then here you can give it like simple instructions and go. So the flow that you see here is that same thing. All I've done is taken and modified the basic prompt, but I've added, you can see, 3 models. So what's going on here? Now, so for one, I've got Groq in here. So if you're not familiar with Groq as a provider, they pretty much specialize in having super fast model execution. And I think we'll see here in a second, that's exactly what we're seeing. Now, you'll notice if I pull out, you see I've got Groq. Again, I can just go to my models. I can just pull out Groq. I need an API key for those guys. But once I've done that, I can come down to the model list. And if I search for deep, you'll see that I have a set of models here. Now, something really interesting about the ones that are provided, you'll see this DeepSeek-R1, the reasoning model, distill Quen and distill Llama at 32 billion parameters and 70 billion parameters. What's going on here? Well, these models were built by the DeepSeek team. The base model is Quen or Llama, and then they've added on the reasoning capability, right? So in this case, this example, I'm going to stick with the DeepSeek Llama 70 billion parameter model in that case. And then we have DeepSeek itself, right? So again, I can just go over. We have support for DeepSeek right here. So I can just drag and drop that over. And you can see there are 2 models, the chat, which is V3, and the reasoner, which is R1, right? And those are available. And this is using the DeepSeek API, right? So this is talking directly to DeepSeek, the provider, while the one up top is actually using Groq with some DeepSeek models that have been implemented and deployed at Groq, right? And then the final one here, and I'm seeing a bunch of questions come up, so I'll get to there in a moment, is Ollama. So, a question that I see all of the time, we get this way. We actually talked about it, last week a little bit, and I've just released some videos on this, is what happens if I don't want to use one of the internet-based providers, right? I don't want my information per se to go out to the providers. I'm concerned about that, especially if I'm working with my own business data. And this is where Ollama really comes in. Ollama is a service that you can use for local models. Matter of fact, if we go to ollama.com, you can see I've been there before. It takes 5 minutes to download and install Ollama. It'll install locally on your system. And what's super cool is in the DeepSeek case, they open sourced their models, right? So you've got the reasoning model, you have the Recoder V2 and DeepSeek V3. So these are some of the latest ones that have been released. And if you click on one of these, then you just run this command to install it, right? It's actually I really love Ollama as a service. So what this allows, though, is this brings the model locally. But there's a key thing you need to know about this, right? Is these models, notice the amount of parameters here, right? And notice the sizes, right? Yes, you can run these locally, but if you're running on like a laptop, like my MacBook or something like that, you may need to go to a smaller model, right? So they have a little less capability, but you can still run them. So something to really keep in mind. As a matter of fact, I've run other 7 billion parameter models locally, like Quen 2.5 and others. They run pretty well, but in the DeepSeek case, it doesn't. Not at least on my local machine. I don't have any specialized hardware or anything. So I'm actually going to use the 1.5 billion parameter model in this case. And if I were to do that and just click on it, it gives me this nice command. I can just, again, run that locally, and it will show up. So then when I'm looking at the models that I have, you can see that I've got R1 latest, but I also have this 1.5 billion parameter. So that's the reasoning model, just like a smaller version of it. Now, before I run something, I'm seeing a bunch of questions. So,
Right. So David,
what do we have here?
there is a question about running Ollama on CPU. Maybe your experience. I think you just covered in the last few minutes, but your experience using maybe different 1.5 billion versus 7 billion versus something else.
Yeah. So excuse me. Yeah. So from the Ollama standpoint, right, it's really going to depend on the hardware you have, and it depends on the model as well. Some have been more optimized to be able to run on CPU. Obviously, for the types of AI workloads and everything, we have GPU. Having a beefier GPU is better. The best thing to do is to look at the description, look at the model description itself in Ollama, and a lot of times they'll give you that information. But it is something to be aware of when you're running Ollama, right? That you are going to be limited by the local hardware that you have. Yeah, so the question, how can I add, I just saw here, how can I add a local model? Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about a second ago. So if you go to Ollama.com, right, and you pick a model, like I said, I started Ollama, just install it, do the download. Like I said, the install is super easy. Pick your model. When you choose your model, you'll get whatever version you want. Just run this command. Once you have Ollama installed, all you have to do is run this command locally. It will install. It'll download it. It'll install it. And then once you have this and you say refresh, you'll automatically update your model list here, right? So I have my Langflow in this case running locally. It's going to detect that my Ollama is running at port 11,434, and then it will expose those. Okay. Any other questions there, Misbah? You think I should attach or like try to get right now?
I think there was a question in general about content for a conference. I think we can come back to that one.
Okay.
Yeah, the local models, I think that's good. There's one question from David about Qwen 2.5
Yeah.
model. I know you use that a lot as well.
Yes.
So the question is, can you pick that somewhere in the Langflow too?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you've downloaded Qwen as part of Ollama, it just shows up, right? So it's right here. Now I'm using the default 7 billion parameter model. I noticed that the question said ideally 72 billion parameter. Again, if you can run that on your hardware, fine, right? But you're going to have to experiment a bit. The Qwen 7 billion runs actually really well on my MacBook Pro, and it gives me nice output and stuff. So yeah, that is definitely an option. Okay, so what I've done here is I'm using Langflow, and I do this a lot in my development and everything. I'm using Langflow to compare 3 different models and their providers at the same time, right? And then there's a little trick I want to show all of you right here. All these are chat outputs. And what I've done is I've just renamed them, blah, 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 blah. I've put something in here, right? And then if I go to controls, you'll see the session ID, and I flip that on. So what am I doing with this? So it's a little trick that is super useful, especially when you're using the playground, but also in your applications. If you set the session ID here, then when I execute these flows, I can run all of these in parallel, and they will all render out with their individual session IDs. And I'll just go ahead and do this. So I'm going to ask every one of these to create a Hello World app in Python. Now, to be fair to these are different versions of the DeepSeek models. You can see Groq went super fast, right? Groq is known for this, by the way, but it is using the 70 billion parameter model, not the 671 billion parameter model in DeepSeek, right? And then we have Ollama with the 1.5 billion. There it goes, running that locally. And so what this allows me to do, and we'll wait for DeepSeek to finish, but it allows me see what happened in my playground. Now I have these different sessions where I can very easily switch between each of the result sets, right? Now, boom, there goes DeepSeek, right? So now what that allows me to do is it allows me to kind of do a bit of a comparison. So as I'm exploring what models maybe I want to use and such like that, I may do something just like this, right? Where I'm going to kind of put them all in parallel. I'm going to run my queries through at the same time and kind of see the output. Now we can see with the Groq, the distilled llama 70 billion parameter model, it was super fast. Also gave me all of the reasoning, right? I personally really like this. I thought I saw a question come in about filtering out the reasoning.
That's right.
Yeah, there are a couple different ways you could do that. One, you could actually just ask it not to give you the reasoning. It very well may comply. But if not, I'm not going to do it here, but there is actually a component called the structured output component. What this allows you to do is you can hook up a language model. You would take the output. You would say, hey, give me the input. And then you set up these name value pairs. And you can say, like, I only want certain pieces of the output, right? You can actually tell it, only give me this piece or give this piece. Or maybe, I may say in the prompt instructions, right? The instructions I give it, I may set up a little bit of a data structure, right? And it makes it very easy then to kind of like parse those things out. But I'm going to kind of gloss over that right now because I think that's a whole different conversation. Okay, so we can see Groq here. Now, what's funny about this is that in the case of Groq, yes, it was fast. It gives me this very kind of terse, like, I mean, I asked it, give me a hello world in Python, and it sure, yep, there you go. It's very, very terse. It does tell me how to run it, so that's great. But let's take a look at what Ollama did, right? So this is actually using the 1.5 billion parameter reasoning model. And you can see in this case, it actually also gave me out its reasoning data, which again, when you're like trying to figure out what a model is doing, I think a lot of these models have been a black box. It's been hard to see exactly what they're doing. One thing I really like about DeepSeek is the fact that it gives me this really great reasoning output. I can see how it came to its conclusions. But you see, this one, it's got a bit more going on for it, right? It actually gave me some code blocks. It tells me how to start the thing. It even gave me some HTML to maybe wrap around and then how to run it. And then finally, DeepSeek. Now, this is the big one, right? It did something similar to the smaller model in Ollama, maybe a bit cleaner and such like that. Again, for the particular task here, I think all of them are pretty usable. And this was without any, explicit instructions other than saying, answer the user, if you were a Gen AI expert or something like that. So I think pretty good output on all of them. They could be clearly, modified and improved, but it gives you kind of an idea of the different models and how they might output their information. Okay, let's see. So I see all sorts of questions in here, Misbah. What do we have to answer?
So there's a very nice question by David about comparing models. So the question is there a way to pick the best part of each output and then yield even better output from that combined response, or just taking the best of each?
Yeah, you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to cheat a little bit. I have something else that I happen to be working on at the same time, but I already have an example of this working that can give a good, demonstrate how I might do what you just asked. So yes, you can take the different output, and I was mentioning the structured output component a moment ago. This is one where I actually have things defined. Now, what this does for me, okay, I have some output. Oh, I'd have to run something, shouldn't I? Yeah, let's see. Let's run something. Hey, Misbah, what's your GitHub handle?
Misbah SY.
Misbah SY? Like that?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So this is a totally different thing. This isn't using DeepSeek. I want to be very clear about that. But what this is actually going to do is this is going to go and pull information from Misbah's GitHub. But to the question, a lot of the times when I'm doing things, especially for application development, I want to have a nice, consistent payload that I can use for my application. LLMs are not known for being very good at that. So there is this component here, the structured output, that now when I've set it up, I can actually have it pull out exactly the pieces that I'm looking for, right? So to the question here, I would probably use a structured output component to define the chunks that I am looking for, the pieces of data that I want. So then when I get out to like my output payload, you can see I've got like these name value pairs, right? That I've got this payload it's a nice consistent payload that I can use. That might be one way to do it, right? So again, what it comes down to is I would suggest taking a look at the structured output, take the output from all of those, put it in this nice structured format. Does cost you a little bit in some processing time because you are in fact using an LLM to pull the data out, but it's super good at pulling out data from this kind of output, right? Like where you've got something like this, right? It's very verbose and everything. The structured outputs are really good at that. Okay. What
Yeah,
else there,
that's
Misbah?
yeah, no, I think that's a very good trick. I mean, to be honest, yeah, just comparing different models, and then getting the output and seeing, what works. I mean, in this case, it's all DeepSeek, but if you have
Yeah.
something like OpenAI and DeepSeek and Anthropic, right? It,
Yeah.
it really helps. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I'll say one
yeah,
thing on that
mhm,
before we move on is that using structured output, what that really allows me to do is because structured output will essentially enforce a consistent payload, I can then at whim change these models however I want. And I know I'm going to get the same payload because if I'm using different LLMs and different models, a lot of times I get different output, right? So using that ensures that when I've wrapped my application around, like there's an API here, all of your flows have an API that you can use to talk to them. But if you're constantly getting a different output payload, it makes it kind of hard to like hook your app up. So that's a pattern that I use. And then that means I can come in here and I can interchange whatever models I'm using at any time.
perfect. So, another question from David: do you have experience using the R10, so not the fine-tune base model? Is that available somewhere in Langflow?
I haven't used that one in particular. I do not believe that it has been exposed via their API yet. I've found a lot that a lot of the providers, when you go to their site and their chat interface, they will have like their latest models or beta models that may not be exposed to the API. Right now, the only two that are exposed are V3 and R1 that I know of.
That's right. Perfect. So, yeah, I think, David, we can keep going. So, one
Okay.
comment from Michelle that this is being recorded and it's going
Yes.
to be shared on socials. So please do follow DataStax and Langflow socials to get updated content from our side.
Alrighty. All right. So very quickly, because I gotta like give Misbah time to actually get through his stuff, is what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go into an agentic flow, right? So we're gonna build an agentic flow with one of the DeepSeek models, but with a big old asterisk on it. So why don't we go ahead and do that real quick? So if I go to new flow here, again, we have these templates. I'm gonna use this simple agent. If you've been with us before, you've probably seen that one because we do this one a lot. But this simple agent is essentially an agentic flow. So we have this agent component here that you can get down in the menu. And it's got two tools, a URL tool and a calculator tool. The URL tool gives the agent LLM the ability to go out externally into the web and search things and scrape and stuff. It's a super, super useful tool. And the calculator is really good for models that aren't great at math. Many of them haven't been, but now, DeepSeek included, there's all sorts of models that have really upped their math capability. So sometimes they may have the tool but don't use it. But this actually works out, very easy to like set up a basic agent. You still have your chat input and your chat output that hasn't changed. We wire them up the same way. The only difference is now with our tools, we wire them into this tools node here, right? Now, here's the fun. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to start a simple query. I'm going to say convert 200. This is I love doing this particular query because in asking a model in an agent to convert 200 USD to the Indian rupee, you actually are doing two things. One, you have to get the latest exchange rates, and two, you need to calculate it, right? So this is a really neat way that you can kind of very quickly show tool use, right? So in the case now, I'm not bringing in DeepSeek yet, but I've used the default OpenAI GPT-4o Mini, and you can see that it went and did that, right? It actually went, got the latest. The model did this on its own, right? It went and got the latest exchange rates. That's what all this information is. And then you use that to calculate the result, right? And so pretty cool, right? However, let's see what happens if we try to bring in DeepSeek. Now, something I should really point out is that the DeepSeek models are not quite ready for tool calling yet. Matter of fact, they have a page on this. I should probably, here, I'm going to drop this in the chat. All right, and right here, this is the piece I want you to see. So R1 does not support tool calling. This is for the DeepSeek Chat, which is a V3. And funny enough, Misbah and I ran into this exact thing. This function calling capability is unstable, which may result in looped calls. We literally ran with the DeepSeek V3 Chat yesterday in an agentic flow, and it actually worked. And then today it did not. And I was taking a look at things and saw that. So they're still working on it. They're working on a fix. They're aware of that. Why am I pointing this out? Because right now, until that's addressed, even though I can technically come over here, I can very easily map in the DeepSeek model, right? And on chat. So that's the correct one there. I could do this, but there's a very good chance that right now it's not going to work, right? So I don't want any of you going down this path and banging your head up against your screen, wondering what is going on. So I would take a look at this page until that happens, right? They expect to resolve it in the next version. But how can you do it now? So it just so happens that if we go to our friend Groq, matter of fact, I can do Groq here. Yeah. If we go to our friend Groq, let me put my Groq API key in, and we are going to say deep. And I'm going to go for this R1 distill Llama 70 billion parameter. Now, I just said a moment ago that the reasoning model from DeepSeek does not have tool calling capability. Yet, the DeepSeek-R1 distill Llama was built with Llama as the base model, which does, right? So check out what happens in this case. Oop, I don't want that. Convert 200 USD to INR. Let's see. I'm looking at this question here that just came in. Let's see, like this. Oh, yeah. Yeah, do I think that it's possible to create a device that offloads the computational load of running massive language models? You can absolutely run your own hardware, right? You can totally run your own hardware with something. If you had like Ollama, set it up as a service. And then once you've done that, once you've exposed that, you could totally run something like that from Langflow. So you could do that if you wanted. You just need to have a little bit of ops expertise and stuff to be able to know how to build your own service and everything, right? But yeah, you could do that. Let's see. Yes, Henrik, Quen, 100%. I should read the question out. Quen should also work with tools, right? Yes, I use Quen 2.5 all of the time, and it works great. It definitely has tool calling, but for some reason, in our testing recently, we found that the distilled version here, this Quen doesn't work as well as what I'm used to with 2.5. I'm not sure why, honestly, but the one so far that we've seen has been most consistent has been the Llama 70 billion. I mean, I will say this. The DeepSeek stuff is still pretty new, right? A lot of the tool calling stuff is coming. I would say it's not all there yet, but it's on the way, right? So let's see. This one's actually taking, you can see, oh, look at that. So this is always some of the interesting stuff that you might run into. It is, in fact, trying to go off and find some information. And let's see. Okay, so it did try. That is actually slightly old information. Now, even though it did it, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to say use the web. It actually tried to do this to find the latest exchange rates. It chose a different URL this time for the exchange rate, which was kind of interesting. Oh, I see a question coming in. When I use web browsing tools, my LLM context often blows up. Do you have this pain point too? You are not alone. You are not alone. Yeah, no, not at all. This is something where, depending on the model you're using and the context window and stuff, like I think one of the methods that I used is to try to really clean my data, especially if I'm scraping URLs or things like that. There's a lot of junk in there that you do not need. So you can use tools that are good at doing, like unstructured.io is a good example of something you can use to scrape and pull out the meat of what you're looking at. And that way you're really pulling down the amount of tokens you need in your context. Okay. All right, let's see.
Lots of questions, David. So a few here. One is the use of Leda MemGPT. Is there something along those lines for powerful agents? So to my knowledge, David, I mean, we started off, providing support for LangGraph and then for Crew AI, but then the team decided, why not just build agents more powerful? in Langflow. So right now it's pretty much comparable. So you can have different type of agents. You can use a different setup, hierarchical, or have some sort of sequential setup. You can use tools, so you can attach those with tools like Composio, and it gives hundreds of integration options, right? So that's where the right now agents are capable within Langflow to do a lot more. So you might not need integration with something like Led or MemGPT. That's my understanding. David, anything to add?
No, not really. Not knowing that I was also answering a question. And so I partially heard what you said, Misbah. No, I don't really have anything to add there. But I do see a question that's related to RAG that I'm going to leave for you in a second here. So what I'm going to do is, so again, I want to preference right now the agent calling, the tool calling with DeepSeek. It's on the way. It's not quite there. Can you do things if you work with, let's say the distilled llama model a little bit more? Yes, but I would say it's not as stable as some of the other models just yet. So I'd say give DeepSeek a little time from that standpoint. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. I'm going to pass it over to Misbah, and I'm going to start answering some of these questions. Sound good?
Awesome. Let's do that.
Let's do it. All right.
All right. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Yeah, lots of questions. So really appreciate it, and very good questions. So yeah, it's definitely quite an active audience here. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, and we love it, by the way. We love how all of you ask. Please pepper us with these questions. It's great. By the way, I will say one thing as you're getting started here, Misbah. I think Misbah is going to show you in the RAG setup. I see one from Kashik. How do you supply a custom knowledge base? Do we populate our own vector DB for this use case? Misbah, to you.
All right, let's do it. So yeah, first example, we'll talk about RAGs because it's one of the most common question we get about different models and how to use them in Langflow and especially in RAG setup. So what I've done here is this is a template, and this is the default template that you get for RAG. So if you were to, let's say, start with a new flow and look for RAG, this is the vector store RAG. And the only thing I changed here is the component where it is by default OpenAI component for RAG setup. So this is for the answer generation. I swapped it out with DeepSeek. And that's pretty much it. If you have a setup in Langflow where basically you use some other model and you want to swap it out, you can easily do that. And everything else remains same. So just want to quickly walk you through, and we have covered this a lot in previous live streams as well. So the bottom half here is the basically taking your file, ingesting that into a vector store as vectors, and from there we are, we have an option to provide some embedding. So in this case, I'm using OpenAI embeddings, and this is something it's flexible. So you could use OpenAI embeddings, you could use Cohere or any other provider. Cohere have really nice multilingual embedding model. So if you want to utilize that, you could use that. But the key thing here is once you generate these embeddings, you want to save it somewhere. And in this case, we're saving it in Astra DB. So if you make an account with Astra DataStack, just if you were to Google that, you can make free account. So you can run the Astra DB free over there. You get an instance, as well as you can run Langflow over there. So both of those you can get for free. So in this case, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm using OpenAI embeddings, saving that in Astra DB. And here, of course, once you attach your token, then you can select a database. So in my case, I have Langflow, and then you can make a new collection, or if you were to just, let's say, refresh, I had a collection in there, I can just use that. So in this case, I call it science and have some science articles here that I'm using for this example. So once you do that, and if you were to just run it once, you'll have the vector embeddings available in there. So I have 44 records. It shows that in Langflow. So that's great. I ran this before, so I have all of that data available as vector embeddings. Now the top half of it is where we are taking the user query and then providing that for answer generation. So if you have worked with RAG, probably you have dealt with this quite a lot. Basically, we're asking question here in the chat input and then supplying the query first to our Astra DB component saying that, based on this query, I want the responses which are most relevant. And then we are going to pass that data to the next steps. So again, same thing. If you were to just, provide your API key and then just, refresh and provide the collection that you want to use for this particular search, and then run this flow, it's going to go through the steps of parsing, first searching for the results, and then once you have the result, parses that and then passes to the component here, DeepSeek, which is the topic for today. So now you have an option to use different models here. Of course, you can use the chat-based DeepSeek model, or you can use Reasoner and see how the responses look different. So, let's say, for example, if I were to just run this example, if I'm asking what is this document about, I ran this just, a couple minutes back or so. So this is the question, and we get an answer saying, this is the document. It summarizes in a certain format and provides that. Now we can do that same thing. We can do that with the chat option and see how that works. And let's see, as long as if the DeepSeek API is working fine. So we'll have a response again based on the chat model. And same thing, you don't have to change much, just the drop down option here. You can go to playground and see what happened, and this is the response. So one of that, the reasoning model, of course, goes into a little more details. The chat model provides a summary. And if you were to use the Groq component or the Ollama or Together AI, you'll see a reasoning component as well available. So anything between the think tags is something that you can see how the model is thinking, reasoning, and then providing the response. So that's the RAG template. It's the usual generic RAG template. The only difference is we're using DeepSeek-based model, since this is a commonly asked question. So I'll pause a little bit. David, any question about RAG before we move on to next template?
Yeah, give me just a second. I was just answering something. Let me see here.
I see something I think in the question section, having a RAG, I think you should be able to let the users extend and curate vector DB autonomously. Is that possible in Langflow, minimal maintenance?
When you say, I guess, Lucas, when you say extend and curate the vector DB autonomously, do you mean like add data, massage it, update data, things like that? Like I don't know, Misbah, if you're interpreting that different. I'm not quite getting what that means, what that question means.
Yeah, I think, especially if it is something about managing the vectors or extending the data in the vector store. So now again, I mean, you could add more documents. That is a possibility if I understand the question correctly. Yeah, I mean, there are some providers as well where you can manage the data at a row level type of a setup where you can update or change or modify, delete, any of that.
Yeah.
So that could be done from some of the providers. But within Langflow, you have an option to add more data to your vector stores and then use that context for your search as well as the answer generation.
Yeah, and like to add on to that a little bit, like you can, from the update standpoint, excuse me, yeah, it's relatively easy, right, to update, say, information that you already have in place. So if you have like one document that you have already put in your RAG system, and then you have, let's say, an update to that, and it's the same document ID or something, it's relatively easy to just send that as an update, and it'll just replace that information, directly in your vector store. Some of that also depends on the vector store you use, but yeah, that shouldn't be an issue.
And I hope I answered the question from Hector about the vector embeddings and how that could be swapped out. So maybe just to cover that again, let's say you are using OpenAI embeddings and you saved that in a vector store, right? So you're absolutely right. The dimensions of that matters. Now, some vector stores are gonna, let you be flexible, where you don't have to select a default or whatever the initial setup of the embedding dimensions is. And there are some which are just you need to add. So it depends on the vector store. So either you have to set it at the beginning or not. So if you're using provider which is not, it's nice. You can use OpenAI embeddings. You can save the embeddings in there, and then swap it out later, right? So that's one use case. The other use case is, let's say, for example, instead of DeepSeek, I want to use a Cohere-based model, or I want to use, OpenAI model, right? So what happens in that case? As long as we keep this setup where we are using one type of embedding provider, it doesn't really matter, because what happens is we are ingesting data, we are querying data, and all of those are in the same dimension, same embeddings provider. Once we get the results from that query, then we pass that as text to the model. So at this stage, once we parse, once we get the results and we parse, it's all text. So it doesn't matter. So from embeddings, it's converted to text. And now we're passing the text down to any of the models that we select.
That's right. And by the way, there was another question that came through, Misbah, related to this. Let me find it real quick. Oh, I think you just answered it by Emre. Okay, which is, should we search for the query in the Astra DB or search for the intent extracted by another LLM? Okay, I think you just addressed that one. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, cool.
All right, awesome. So next one, we'll just make it quick. I think we've got about a few more minutes. So this is also a common question about using some sort of component where we can extract or scrape data from a web page and use that to answer questions. So it's also a simple setup where essentially we are going to use Firecrawl scrape API in this case. And I've got the setup where basically you make an account. It's you can use the free tier, get the API key, provide that in the component. Now you are going to provide your any sort of web page that you want to scrape, and based on that you get some response. So once you have the response, so we can run this as is just to see how the response is going to be. So I provided docs page for Langflow, and this is going to look at just the first page. There is another component available here which can also drill down multiple levels if you like. So if you were to search for Firecrawl, you'll notice that. So there are two of those. So this one here is just for the first page, and I'm going to get the results. So if we were to just inspect results, we'll see it pulled the text from just the first landing page of documentation. Now, great. Once we have that, we are passing that over. So we want to convert this data to message and provide that as a prompt to the model. That's exactly what I'm doing. So if you notice, the template just says that, data in the curly braces, and that opens the option to attach, and then we have the message from the other side passing to the prompt. And if I were to run this, we'll see how that looks like. So at this stage, we have the context available, and we're saying just answer based on that context, providing that to Groq-based DeepSeek model here. So I selected, so any of the models are fine. So let's refresh and select maybe the Llama option. All right, there we go. And with that, basically, now this is pretty much it. Now you can provide any website, web page, or documentation and ask questions and get responses. So that's exactly what I did earlier. I was asking, okay, how do we get started with Langflow? It looked at the page. It went through the whole thought process. So the whole thinking, reasoning is available. And then based on that, it answers the question at the end. So that's a use case which a lot of folks want to answer. So if you're reading through some documentation and then you want to get quickly some answer, you can utilize this, or you can use the Firecrawl API and basically go through the data, scrape it, and answer questions. So that's second template. And then the last one I wanted to show is the custom component generator. This is also a question we get a lot. How can we generate custom components in Langflow? So Langflow team made it easy, where basically this is a template available. So if you were to search through the available templates. And if you were to go to the coding section, you'll see there is the custom component generator. That's exactly what we're using. And the only change here is instead of the default, I believe it's the Anthropic model that's used in there, we're going to be using Groq-based call to the DeepSeek model. So now here, by default, a lot of the web pages are already provided, so you might not necessarily need to add anything. If you do notice that you want to add some more, you can easily add those here. And based on all of those web pages, now we can answer, or in this case, we're taking basically the instructions for the model to generate custom code. So the first thing that I'm saying here is the input to generate a component to do certain tasks, right? So in this case, I'm saying just, take a test, convert it into image. So this is something just general that came to me, like, okay, how can we generate image? Now, the good thing is I am running this locally within, just on my computer. So in this case, I can install any Python packages, right? So that's the benefit. If you were to run this locally, you can run anything that's available on pip or just any Python package, install that and run that. And if the code generation tells you to run a certain package, then it's already available for you. So that is something nice. So when I asked question about, in this case, to go from text to image and how that could be done as a custom component, it went through the whole pipeline and it generated a response. And in this case, it provided a code. Basically, it went through the documentation available to it, it thought through it, reasoned, and then based on that, it said, this is the code that you can utilize. And if you were to just copy paste this as a new component, and custom component is something available within Langflow, so we can search for custom component. All right, maybe I'm missing that. Okay, so maybe I'm not able to search that with the available tool. It's yeah, I'll have to look for the text for that. But in general, you can pretty much go to any of the components, change the code, in theory, and add the code provided by the this model, and then run it. So now the thing is, I noticed that some of the imports are not available in this case. So you might have to see how the imports works. So right now we just have code, and this is just starting from inputs. So you might have to look through the imports. So that's where some of the models might do better than the others. So Anthropic, 3.5, Sonnet, Claude 3.5 is known for really good code generation. So that's really nice. The reasoning model also does fine, but I've seen that using it for tasks like debugging or generation of just requirement documents, or some tasks which a project manager would do, just generating those type of documentation is quite nice with the reasoning model in DeepSeek. And then taking that over to the Anthropic model 3.5 and code generation over there, it really does a great job. So this is the code generation case. Again, just to kind of summarize, we're asking to generate a custom component. It helps us generate the code, and we can take the code and pretty much, add it to any of the available blocks here, or look for a custom component, which I believe I should be able to find once we're going through the questions. So yeah, David, that was it. So 3 templates, RAG, and then answering question based on websites, and then third one where basically we're generating custom components using the Langflow documentation as well as code base.
Got you. Yeah, that sounds, I mean, that's a lot of different flows. Hopefully you guys all got various, the various kinds of examples of different ways you could potentially use DeepSeek. Again, DeepSeek's still relatively new, right? So there's a lot that is still being formed, but there's also a lot that you can use and experiment with now. I'm just kind of finishing up some questions here in the Q&A, Misbah.
Sure.
I don't know if I'm trying to take a look at the chat. If there's any burning question, let's see. Okay, I've answered a lot of those. Well, I think I think since we are done with all of the various content, unless there's a burning question or something, Misbah, that you want to address here on screen and live, we can just follow up with the rest of them in the Q&A and probably close it on up.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. Just wanted to point out, I think there was a question about participation in a conference or so, or content for a conference. So if there is a suggestion, if there's a particular type of content that you would like for us to generate or to be part of a conference, do let us know. I'm happy to look into that. Also, for content in general, we do get requests on different social media platforms, and we take that, we try to build the content. So if there is any requests, do let us know. We'll do our best to generate content on that as well as the live streams. We do our best to follow the topics that are most requested, and then host those as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Misbah, and thank you everybody for joining us again today. Again, we love the interaction in all these questions. We're doing our best to try to answer all those. Hopefully we'll see you again here soon with our next topic. And always, take a look at our the Langflow channel and the DataStax Developers YouTube channels. We should probably post those links, as I say, because both Misbah and I, we create, and our teams, we actually create all sorts of video content, blog content, everything free for you to help learn with all of us on our AI journeys. And so with that, everybody, take care. Take care, Misbah. See ya.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, David.